So God showed Samuel David's heart and said, that's the man, and he anointed him. And it says in verse 13, the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day. It was not just Samuel pouring some oil on him and laying his hand on him. The Spirit of God backed it up and said, this is my man. And you see how wonderfully David was throughout his life. And then we read in 2 Samuel in chapter 11. After David had been king for about 20 years, this wonderful man of God who wrote scripture, anointed by God, he had seen what happened to Samuel's children. He had seen what happened to Saul. He had heard what happened to Eli. But he thought, no, it won't happen to me. I'm a man after God's own heart. And 20 years he had won so many battles, mightily anointed by God, writing scripture, that he began to relax. That's when danger sets in. When you've been faithful to the Lord for many years, and God has blessed you, blessed your family, and you suddenly begin to think, oh, I'm a sort of a senior brother, I'm a senior elder. That's the time danger comes in. Not that you will go and kill somebody, but the sharpness of discernment goes away. You don't hear God so clearly as you did 30 years ago. That's what happened to David. He was about 50 years old now, and he couldn't hear God as clearly as he did 20 years earlier. When he was 30, he heard God so clearly he could write it down and God put it in the Bible. Amazing words. But now, those days the kings were the leaders in the battle. Kings used to be the generals who would lead the army to battle, and they never had any battles in wintertime. It was too cold. But when spring came and the kings go out to battle, 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 1, David was supposed to lead the army. But he said, well, I'm senior now, I can sit back. And he said to Joab, who was his sister's son, who was the general, you go, fight the battle. Joab was the general. And David stayed at Jerusalem. We read once when Moses sent Joshua to the battle in, I think it's Exodus chapter 17. Moses went up to the mountain and lifted up his hands and said, oh God, please help Joshua when he's fighting the Amalekites. And God answered Moses' prayer and they would defeat them. And when Moses' hands got tied, the Amalekites would win. And then Aaron and Hur held up Moses' hands and he kept it up like that and the Amalekites were defeated thoroughly. That's what Moses did when he sent Aaron to battle. What did David do? He should have been doing that. When he sent Joab to battle, he should have been praying. Instead of that, he was sleeping. And he was sleeping right up till the evening, verse 2. Can you imagine that? In the evening. Now, most of us get up in the morning. In the evening, well, he was a king. He could do what he liked. He arose from his bed. No prayer, nothing. I hope when you get out of your bed, the first thing you do is pray. I hope it is. You don't have to be on your knees. But I hope as soon as you come out of bed, you think of Jesus. First thing in the morning. A lesson here. If David, when he got out of bed, had knelt down first and said, Father, I think of Joab now fighting the battle. Please help him to win the victory. It would have been a different story. But he got up and relaxed and he said, let me go for a stroll on the roof of my house. And he looks over the wall and he sees a woman bathing. Of course, it was absolutely stupid of Bathsheba to be bathing out there in open, knowing that people from the terrace in the opposite house can see me. Crazy. It's not only David is guilty, Bathsheba is equally guilty. It's all these women who, she provoked David. You think it's only the men are guilty who look at a woman and lust? What about the women who wear these tight-fitting clothes? Aren't they guilty just like Bathsheba? What about these women who expose more and more of their body? They may not be bathing naked, but they're doing something like that when they make their pants so tight and don't cover the joints of their legs and make their upper part of their dress so tight and expose more and more of their hands and legs and all that, and stomachs more and more. Are they guilty or not? Was Bathsheba guilty? She should have had some sense. And all these girls who dress like that should have some sense. Okay. And David said, who's that? And they told him, that's the wife. That's somebody else's wife. You know, those days kings just married whom they liked, but definitely not somebody else's wife. He already had 6 or 7 wives. And David said, it doesn't matter if he's somebody else's wife. Bring him in. Bring her in here. And he had sex with her and she conceived. Now what to do? Somehow put the blame on her husband. He called her husband back from the battlefield. Send me Uriah the Hittite, verse 6. And Uriah came, and David told Uriah, go down to your house, verse 8, so that he could go and sleep with his wife, and at least he'll think the child was his. But Uriah would not go to his house. Imagine what an upright man Uriah was. He slept at the door of the king's house, verse 9. And David said to Uriah, you didn't go to your house, verse 10? Listen to Uriah. How can I go to my house when my fellow soldiers are out in the open field, verse 11, battling out there? They're battling out there, my fellow soldiers, and you mean I should go and sleep with my wife? No! By your life, verse 11, by your soul, I will not do such a thing. Who was more upright here? David or Uriah? Sometimes those so-called leaders or those who imagine themselves to be godly and spiritual, God's people, are much worse than some of the younger believers who have more uprightness. And then God called him he called him one day and made him drunk, verse 13. He was trying every possible trick. But he still would not go down to his house. What a man. And then David had only one solution. I don't want to get caught. So he wrote a letter to Joab, verse 14, and said, tomorrow in the battle, make sure you put Uriah right in front. And when the battle is really thick, verse 15, all of you withdraw so that he'll be killed. This is another form of hiring. You know, they hire murderers nowadays. Go and kill that fellow. This is what David was hiring, a murderer. And so it happened that happened, and Uriah was killed. And we read in the 17, Uriah died. And so they had to send a report to the king what happened in the battle. And Joab sent a report to the king saying, sorry, we lost the battle. And when the king says, why in the world did you lose the battle? Don't you know that you should not have gone so close to the wall? Verse 20, just whisper in his ear, by the way, Uriah is also dead. That'll calm David. So the messenger reported and told David, we lost in the battle. And David says, and he told him, by the way, Uriah is also dead. Oh, David says, and it's okay. Sometimes people die in battle, we can't help it. And then he tells Bathsheba to come, I'm going to marry you. This is the great David who started out as a man after God's own heart, who wrote scripture. I'm just trying to show you how godly men decline as time goes on. Turn to 1 Kings chapter 1. David was now an old man. 1 Kings 1 verse 1. And we read here that one of his sons, he said, my father's going to die now. And David had a number of sons. And Adonijah, he had a number of sons through many wives. I think David had about 8 wives. And each of the sons said, I want to be the next king. And 1 Kings 1 verse 5, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself and said, I'll be the king. And why did this son of David become so rebellious? Listen to the story. All fathers, please listen carefully now. We have seen David's failure as a husband, as a king. Now you see his failure as a father. David, his father, had never crossed him. That means in the margin it says, never given him any pain. He never gave him any pain by strong words. Why do you do that? No. He never spoke like that to Adonijah. He never spanked him. He never caused him any pain, it says in the margin of my Bible. And he also never asked him a question, why did you do that? No. Why? Because this boy Adonijah, verse 6, was a very handsome man. You have a good-looking kid, better looking than all the other children, or a good-looking daughter, better than all the others, and she's your favorite, or he's your favorite, and you don't want to pain him or her. See what happened to that boy when he grew up. Finally, he had to be killed. You read the rest of the story. These are warnings. These things are written for our instruction. Now let's come to the New Testament. We read in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 20. Paul was in Ephesus. He planted churches in many places, but he never stayed long in any place. But in Ephesus, he stayed a long time. Then he had to leave. Acts chapter 20 from verse 17, he called the elders of the church of Ephesus to a place called Miletus. He said, I want to talk to you. And he told them, verse 31, remember, Acts 20:31, that night and day, for a period of 3 years, I kept on preaching to you with tears. I used to weep while I was preaching, and those are not artificial tears, like some people have got the ability to produce artificial tears to move people to compassion. That's all rubbish. They are actors. Paul was not an actor. He was genuinely concerned that these people should take sin seriously, and that's why he wept for them. Like Jeremiah once said, if you don't listen to me, I'll go alone and weep for you people. Paul was a bit like that himself. He admonished them with tears. You know, God gives his word to those who have compassion for his people. Very often, God does not give his word to many of his servants because they don't love his people. They only know how to rebuke them and correct them. Yeah, Paul spoke strong words, but he loved them. He had tremendous compassion for God's people, and that's why Paul was a prophet who always had a word. And he says night and day for 3 years. Have you calculated that? He used to preach early in the morning and he used to preach at night. John Wesley used to be like that in the 1700s. He used to go out at 5 o'clock in the morning to go and to preach to people before they went to work. And people listened to him. They had to go off to work by 6 o'clock and he'd preach to them and come back. Imagine a preacher who would go at 5 o'clock in the morning before people go to work. Imagine the people who are willing to come together at 5 o'clock in the morning to listen to a message before they go to work. Would you find such people today? No. And then in the evening, again, after they finished work and they'd say, let's have a meeting, he preached morning and evening in one day, in 1 year, that is 730 messages. And in 3 years, that is 2,100, nearly 2,200 messages, let's say. Imagine listening to 2,200 sermons. Imagine if you had 2,200 videotapes of Paul's message. Boy, I would have loved to listen to all of them. That's what he preached. In Ephesus, 2,000 sermons with tears.